Good evening. This is John Young with the Disc Jockey News and Disc Jockey News TV. It is Tuesday night. It is Tuesday night with Ben Stowe night. Ben, wow, you're here and you've been busy.
Yeah, I was hard at work with the screwdriver.
Oh my goodness gracious. If there's anything left at the NLFX Pro headquarters there that hasn't been taken apart, they sold it to them.
If there is, I'll get busy. I'll find it. I'll root it out.
Oh, good stuff there. Good stuff. Wow, lots of stuff there. Well, tonight's topic, we wanted to dig into amplifiers because that's something that's, as DJs, we live and breathe by to some extent, and we kind of take them for granted just a little bit. And I mentioned that to you as the topic, and I guess you kind of got excited.
Well, I threw some stuff together real quick, and like I mentioned in another show, that's always the fun part, is seeing what I can find on short notice. And I was able to come up with a few gems, including one from my personal collection, which we'll look at here in a bit.
Oh, good stuff. Yeah, that's some neat stuff. So, well, let's start. Just for those who may know that they exist, amplifiers, because they're part of our system, but they don't know much about it. Let's kind of go back in history a little bit and look at some of the early amplifiers and how that technology has changed over the years.
All right. Well, I think fundamentally an amplifier is both a very simple device and a very complicated device all at once. And certainly today's amplifiers are much more complicated, and we'll get into why as we get into the architecture of how they work. And what's necessary to make them work well. But really an amplifier in the simplest terms is just something that takes a signal and makes it louder. And at the core of it is a device like a transistor now, or in the good old days, a tube. Mm-hmm. And tube amps are still being used. There's some audio purists that, still believe a tube is the way to go. Although in terms of power amplifiers for production and DJ, we really don't see any tube amps being used anymore. We'll get into the why as we get going on. Sure. Not the least of which is that they're fragile, but fundamentally, they're well, I think, and I don't know why this number is sticking in my head, but I think the first amplifier was invented in like 1909. Random fact, but I would love to tell you who invented it, and for the life of me, I just can't remember right now. So
we found one that you don't remember. We got it.
I'll go look it up. As soon as we're done filming, I'll go look it up.
We'll do a text across the bottom.
Yeah.
And Ben said. Oh. So Ben, for those who have no idea, when you said tube, when you use that, what is a tube amplifier?
Well, let's just dig right into my personal collection. This is I'm going to break it before I even get to put it on TV.
Oh no.
I picked this one up at a bowling alley in Iowa, and I just traded a little bit of work for it. Two of the reasons that I did was the bowling alley used to be owned by my best friend in grade school, and there's a pretty good chance possibly that my mentor in electronics was the one who sold this to him.
Very cool.
So anyway, I traded the guy some work, and he said, "How much do I owe you?" I said, "That right there, the amplifier." So, anyway, he got the better end of the deal, I think, financially, but nostalgic, whatever. I definitely scored. This amplifier, this company started making products in 1946. And this was one of their earlier models. We don't really know exactly when this was made, but it's probably at least 60 years old at this point, probably sometime in the early 50s. So, and this is a tube amplifier, and it's a 10-watt amplifier.
Ooh.
Yeah, by today's standards, not real rockin', but this was in fact a PA amplifier. That was its intended purpose.
Wow.
And when we take a look here, we can see that we have our speaker outputs. We have a microphone input somewhere back here. I think I got my hand on it. Yep, right there, microphone input. And I took the screws out earlier so we could take a look inside. And we can see, there really isn't a lot going on. When you look at this amplifier versus some of the other ones on my table here, there isn't much to it. And this here is the tube that we're referring to, and it's called a tube amp because it is a glass tube.
Wow, sure.
This was replaced in the 50s and 60s by the transistor, and those who are older would remember the term transistor radio.
Yes.
I don't think we call a radio a transistor radio anymore because, of course, it's a transistor radio, But there was a time when that was, it was the latest and greatest. And obviously you can see the tube is big. Tubes have to warm up, and the transistor is a smaller solid-state device, and changed fundamentally the ability to make these sorts of things more powerful and smaller and lighter. However, at the early expense maybe of sound quality anyway.
Now that's a roughly 60-year-old device, and yet I think I recognized a couple of components in that one. Am I correct?
Well, I don't know what you recognized. I can't read your mind. But
well, right in the center towards the back of it, it looks like yes, that looks familiar. I've seen that in different devices, have I not, or something similar?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you'll see something in this amplifier here is less than a year old, and you'll see something that looks very similar right there. Some things haven't changed much at all. You'll see another one in this amplifier. Let's go get it. Probably right down in here.
Yeah. Interesting. So that's how some technology has changed, and some not so much.
Yeah, others, it hasn't. I always find it fascinating when I look at where our technology is today, and I think about the iPhone being only 7 years old, for example, and then I remember that, in the 60s, we put men on the moon. And I've had the good fortune of being able to go to some of the museums and see some of the training capsules and some of the Apollo and Gemini capsules, and you think, holy smokes, I mean, this era technology, we put men on the moon. That's incredible to me.
Yeah, it is.
So
let's look at the sheet on that particular unit now, because some people will be looking at that and it's like, oh, how much did that cost? And all, yeah, well,
I think it's about $32, as I remember.
Gang, we've got that information, so let's pop that up right here.
Okay, yeah, there you see it. The model PA10 from Precision Electronics. It was about $32 back in the day.
Look at there, $32. Hey, but if you look down towards the bottom, we scroll a little bit farther, you could get a 30-watt amp there in the lower right for net price of $129.50.
Now, bear in mind, in 1950s money, that's a chunk of change. I mean, we're talking about some dough here,
Wow, that's cool. Let's just continue down as we scroll down a little farther and looking at some of the other offerings there with more tubes than you can shake a stick at.
Yeah, and you can build your own kits. I'm happy to report that from my mentor, I got some of his replacement tubes and tube regenerators and tube testers, and obviously I was very sad at his passing, but I have those memories and those pieces of him to carry forth. So
that's pretty cool. Now, Ben, what else do you have? You've got some older stuff there, I'm guessing, with all of the things across your table there.
I do. I've got kind of a broad range represented from the late 40s or 50s up to today. This is a contribution to my growing museum from a friend of mine who was absolutely destined for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The guy is just he's crazy, man. I love him. He's been playing longer than I've been alive, I think. So anyway, he contributed this. I'm guessing this amp is probably 80s era.
Okay.
I didn't look, but you can see here some more of those components that we saw before. Nice big transformer. I can tell you this thing's very heavy.
Yeah.
Some big capacitors. The inside of it is covered in soot. I don't know if I could overstate what kind of a rock star he is. There's no telling why that thing is full of soot, but anyway, I'm sure they had some good times.
And for the younger DJs, that was during the time when smoking was everywhere. I mean, you didn't have to have a fog or a hazer in most of the shows because there was so much cigarette smoke. So half of that's probably a layer of the tar from cigarettes.
Oh, I'm sure all of it. That's probably 30 years of hard rocking in bars. No kidding, quite literally.
Oh.
So I kind of feel like I want to go wash my hands now. But On with the show, right?
Yep, exactly.
I'm getting my black fingers here. And now moving into the moving into the 90s and on up. But this is probably a good time to stop and talk about the fundamental topologies of an amplifier. What makes an amplifier tick?
Sure.
And we talked about it too. We'll jump right into the transistor era. And people probably still hear terms today. Undoubtedly, you hear these terms: Class A, Class B, Class AB, Class H, Class D, and it a lot of times manufacturers just hang this out there like, well, it's a Class H, and you think, well, it must be good because they said it, right?
Yeah, it's an H, and that's got to be better than that.
Right? Yeah. I mean, by the way, I am a fan of Class H amplifiers; they're good amplifiers. But anyway, that being said, let's talk about what makes them different.
Yeah.
And there's pros and cons to each, really. And we'll kind of go through. I've got some graphics for you.
Yeah.
If we take a look at a Class A amplifier, and we can see that we've got a transistor and it's outputting the entire signal, up and down side of it. It's probably the best sounding amplifier in terms of the purity of the sound, but it's also the least efficient. A Class A amplifier produces approximately 20% of the energy it takes into audio, and the rest goes to heat. Those of us who've been around a long, long time, we can remember the days when you could fry eggs on your amplifiers. I actually thought about bringing an iron skillet and some eggs in here just for dramatic effect, but my wife caught me at the door and said, "Where are you going with those eggs?"
I got a show.
Yeah, just trust me, it'll be great. And she said, "No, it won't." So, but I'm back in the fridge. Yes, dear. Okay. Anyway, Class A amplifiers are very inefficient. You need a lot of power coming in to get a little bit of power out, but they were great sounding amps. All right, yeah, that's the graphic right there. We can see a smaller sine wave coming in and a larger sine wave coming out, and one transistor, and that's it. That's a really oversimplified look at a Class A amplifier, but nuts and bolts, that's it. All right, now what we're seeing here is a Class B amplifier, and what we see here is that we have the whole sine wave coming in, but only half of the sine wave coming out. And basically, Class B amplifier is a lot more efficient, but it only produces half of the signal. And you say, well, that doesn't work for listening. Right. So we would typically take a Class B amplifier and use it in what we would call like a push-pull configuration, where we would use two transistors, one to produce the top, one to produce the bottom of the sine wave. Go ahead and throw that graphic up for the Class B push-pull. And what we see now is that we have two transistors involved, and now we have a much, much more efficient amplifier than the Class A, but we also have a lot of distortion. And that's as those transistors are basically, saturating and switching on and off, and, some super nerdy stuff that we're going to just skip. But this was a way to increase efficiency, but at the expense of audio quality. And so what came was kind of a hybrid between these, which is a Class AB amplifier. It's sort of a mashup, if you will, of a Class A and a Class B amplifier. Okay, and what we see now is I decided to skip drawing schematics for everybody here because we're not designing amplifiers, we're just trying to understand them, right? What we see here is the output of a Class AB amplifier, and it brought about the audio quality closer to A, but the efficiency closer to B. It was sort of a happy marriage. Still largely inefficient by today's standards, but Class A AB amplifiers were the workhorses of the majority of my career and probably yours.
Sure.
It was what we used most through the 90s and the early 2000s. They were heavy, but that doesn't necessarily have a lot to do with the amplifier. It has more to do with the power supply, so more on that later. Mm-hmm. What we see here in the green is the audio that's being produced, but a Class AB amplifier only has a positive and a negative power rail, and everything in the red is dissipation to heat. And again, I remember warming my hands many times at a cold gig to the output of my Class AB amplifier.
Yep, for sure.
What it wasn't making into sound, it was making into warmth.
Yes.
And so what the engineers did to, the sort of the next level of improvement is what we call a Class H amplifier. Okay, now what we see here in a Class H amplifier is we see multiple power rails. We see two pink power rails on the top and two cyan-colored power rails on the bottom. And what the Class H amplifier does is it switches between those power rails as you exceed the limit of one power rail, it switches to the next, and thus you can see here there's a lot less loss to heat. It's not dissipating heat except for, where it has to go to the nearest power rail. So it's a lot more efficient and ran a lot cooler. We'll take a look here. We'll kind of summarize this with some pie charts I made. I got crazy in Excel. We'll look at that in a minute. But now we're going to look at a Class D amplifier. Okay, now what we see here is, I wish I had made all these drawings the same, and apologies in advance. I used some existing stuff, and so there isn't a lot of consistency throughout. And frankly, I was getting rushed as I put this one together. But what we see, the green line represents our sine wave, and down below we see a bunch of squares. And Class D amplifiers operate using what's called pulse width modulation, which in essence is turning on and off a pulse and changing the width of that pulse, how long it stays on and how long it goes off. And it's exactly what we can see, down here. Because of this, they're frequently called digital amplifiers, and people also want to believe that Class D stands for digital. Mm-hmm. It's my belief that it doesn't. It just happened to be the next letter that was up or something. I don't know. But anyway, people believe D is digital, and maybe it is. It doesn't really matter. But it's a good way to remember that's what's going on. Now, this is a really, really oversimplified explanation of a Class D amplifier. As you can imagine, having square pulses doesn't make for a great audio sine wave, and there's a lot of other crazy things that are going on, like triangle waves at 600 kilohertz and all kinds of crazy things. And then we have all these high-frequency artifacts, and this is probably a really good place to stop with the engineering speech, but just to say that good-sounding Class D amplifiers cost more than bad-sounding Class D amplifiers, and that should seem fairly apparent on the face of it. Mm-hmm. But the reason is we have to get rid of these artifacts. We have to get rid of these things on the high frequency. We need to put in filters and things, and good circuits, good design, and good filters cost money. So one can't assume that all Class D amplifiers are the same any more than we would assume that about any other class of amplifier. But Class D amplifiers, by comparison, are exceptionally efficient. And now we can just kind of summarize, and then we'll take a look actually at some of these amps I got in front of me, but let's go ahead and throw up the pie charts. Okay, so what we see here is Class A is very inefficient. Most of the energy that comes into the amplifier becomes heat. Class B is much more efficient, but has a lot of distortion. Class AB converts about half the energy into heat and half the energy into audio. So it was a good compromise in terms of audio quality for efficiency until we got into things like Class H and Class D. And we can see there, Class D is 90% efficient, where 90% of the electricity that comes in becomes audio, which is incredibly efficient. And they are actually very good sounding amplifiers. Amplifier circuitry design, particularly the better models, the more expensive models, very good sounding and certainly adequate for what we're doing in concerts and DJ and that sort of thing.
Well, that's pretty cool, Ben. Now let's take a look at some of the stuff you've got on the table, because it looks like, there's a lot of things we haven't even touched at all that you've got in front of you there.
Yeah, I've got kind of an array of sort of modern amplifier design, as it were. Again, this one is probably 20 years old. This probably goes back into the 90s. See how much noise I can make while I do this.
Yeah. We're good.
What we see here, and again, people use terms like digital amplifier, and they also confuse things like digital power supplies and those sorts of things with the amplifier itself. Of course, the power supply is very important to an amplifier because it needs to be able to get power to the power rails in order to get power to the speakers. What we see here is we see a very large chunk of iron and copper, our transformer right here. And then we also see some very large capacitors that are going to help store, some electricity for when we need it, when those big bass hits come and we have to provide more electricity than we have coming in from the wall.
Right.
That's how we get into amplifiers that have output ratings greater than what the wall circuit would provide for them. People say, well, how's that done? Well, we charge these up and discharge them very rapidly on the bass pulses and those sorts of things.
Which as a little warning for the viewers out there who may get crazy and want to touch one of those.
You don't.
There we go. I think I've heard you talk about that in a different episode.
Remember what I just said. They store electricity, which means even though this amplifier is unplugged, these capacitors may be charged, and a capacitor that size can really ruin your day. It potentially could be the last thing you ever do. So don't. Okay. I mean, I guess it's up to you, but my strong advice is don't.
We like that one. That's our best advice.
Yeah. And what we see here are these are the transistors.
Slide that closer to you, Ben, just a little bit. We can't see the end of it.
Oh, well. Let's see what we can do here.
There we go. Now we can see it.
All right.
Sorry.
So here's our output transistors, and what we can see is they're mounted on this aluminum fin. And again, some of the energy becomes audio, some of the energy becomes heat, and we have to deal with that heat. So we have vents on the side, we have fans. There's a fan right down in here, I believe, on this guy. Yep, there it is. And we have to exhaust that heat away from these transistors, or they will cease to exist. So that's kind of a common theme, we'll see with amplifiers. But again, as Class D amplifiers are much more efficient, we see less concern with heat. So anyway, there's one.
Now, Ben, on the back side of that, can we take a look at the back of that one?
You can.
A little bit. Well, let's keep going. We'll come back to the outputs on some of these. Yeah, I want to get back to that question because I know that that's a big thing with a lot of people is the output capabilities of amplifiers and what the differences are. So let's get back to that one at the end.
This particular amplifier is an install model, so the back might look a little unfamiliar to a DJ. They might say, "Well, where do I plug in?"
Yeah.
Well, remember, you plug it in once in an install, and then you leave it.
Yep. So
it looks a little different. Actually, this other one I have is also an install model. But
we'll go back to the 1947 amplifier.
Yeah, that one has disconnects. All right.
10 watts of power there, man.
What we see here, this amplifier is significantly lighter, and we don't see a large transformer. We don't see large capacitors. This one, has a much more efficient power supply. Now, there's some disagreement on whether that's better or worse. Having a big old power supply and big old capacitors, again, gives you a lot of power available, but it's very heavy.
Yeah.
So engineering is always a series of compromises. This amp is much lighter. But here again, down below here, you can't see them, are my transistors, and we see a lot of space dedicated to cooling.
Yeah.
We have our fan here and a lot of space dedicated to these heat sinks and getting that heat off those transistors. This is a fairly modern design. It's a current production model, in fact. In fact, speaking of current production, not all amplifiers are still using these switch mode power supplies, these digital power supplies. This is an amplifier off of a powered speaker, and we can see it has a very large and very heavy toroidal power supply. And again, pros and cons. You got to lift it; it's a beast. But of course, it has a lot of power available to it. And I would have to look to be sure, but I believe this amplifier here is a Class H, just in case anyone's curious. It's unlikely it's going to be meaningful to anybody looking at, well, maybe some of you. But, and this amplifier here, also from a powered speaker, this weighs, gosh, maybe, I don't know, 2 pounds, maybe?
Wow. Very light.
This is a Class D. And again, we see, a very small, light switch mode power supply, So kind of the evolution of amplifiers and their power supplies that, we go from a 10-watt amplifier here to a 700-watt amplifier here, and this weighs about a third of what that does.
Wow. So now with the output of those now, so with the install, of course, you were saying the connections are a little bit different, but now some amplifiers have like a stereo output. Some amplifiers have, I've seen parallel, I've seen bridge mode. Can you give us a kind of a layman's view of what the difference is between those three?
Sure, absolutely. This amplifier, for example, is only a one-channel output. It goes into a subwoofer, and so the output is right there. Again, it's something we would, it's permanent inside that box, of course. Both of these amplifiers are two-channel amplifiers, and of course with this one we saw kind of a symmetrically identical halves inside the amplifier, and we'd see the same thing in this one, and that's those two channels.
Yeah.
And so in a stereo amplifier or in a stereo usage, we simply have one channel coming in the back, and that channel comes out amplified. And we have that times two. So you could say channel A or channel B. I'm deliberately not calling them left and right because they don't have to be. They could be used as two mono signals, like monitor 1, monitor 2. In my touring rig, my amplifiers, channel 1 drives high frequency, channel 2 drives the mid frequency, for example. Mm-hmm. But in any case, what comes in channel 1 comes out channel 1, what comes in channel 2 comes out channel 2, and that could be left, right, or any of those other scenarios. In parallel mode, what comes in channel 1 comes out channel 1 and channel 2.
Okay.
And you might say, well, why would I want that? Well, there might be some scenarios where, I have lots of speakers to drive, and I have to be careful about my load impedance, but I don't want to have to duplicate that signal. I want the amp to do that for me. I don't want to have to plug in two things or drive two outputs or Y them or make jumpers or any of that. I just want to hit a switch and say, hey, dude, just take this and send it out both channels, okay? In this scenario, both channels are still operating completely independently. With respect to the load, they just happen to be outputting the same signal. Now, bridge is really entirely different.
Okay.
In a bridge, when we bridge the amplifier, we're taking these two amplifiers inside one box and we're saying, come together, be one amplifier. And so we're combining the power of those two channels, but in so doing, we're having the load's impedance, and we're increasing the distortion, and we're increasing the amperage. So we have to be a lot more careful when we do bridge. It's not just a magic increase in power. It comes with some engineering consequences. But that's what happens when we bridge them. We're combining those power rails and saying, all right, now you are no longer a two-channel amp. You're a much more powerful one-channel amplifier.
Interesting, but at the cost of
at the cost of greater distortion. Your amp is going to run out of headroom much faster too. It's because we've lowered the the impedance that's being presented to it. That increases the amperage through the circuit and all those kinds of fun things.
I've learned some more stuff tonight.
Happy I could help.
That's kind of a running thing now. Is Ben gets his table all messed up, and we get to learn all sorts of cool stuff. Yay!
Well, we can talk about a couple quick other amplifier terms that you typically find on spec sheets. I understand the need for spec sheets, and I'm a big fan of spec sheets as long as they're accurate and they're engineering. But again, I also understand that, most of the people who are watching this video, that a lot of that is difficult to sort through. And part of that is because of the different ways that measurements are taken and those sorts of things too. So, and understanding what's a meaningful value for some of these things. So maybe we can shine a little light on it here for you.
Sure. And I'm thinking as you're mentioning that, some of the first thing that comes to my mind is, obviously the wattage of these things, how they're measured, what have you. But then there's things like a distortion, I believe. They talk about a harmonic distortion.
Yeah, THD, total harmonic distortion. And we actually just kind of alluded to that with bridge mode. In fact, if you look at an amplifier spec sheet, you'll see that the THD, the distortion is higher when it's in bridge mode. And really that's kind of self-explanatory. Distortion is unwanted signal. It's what we send in is what we want to get out. And that's not always what we get. We get some of these other artifacts and these distortions, these noises that are not our musical signal amplified. And the ratio of the signal to the distortion is how we determine that. What percentage of that? And there's some disagreement about what a person can hear. What's meaningful. We generally see numbers that are tiny fractions of a percentage. And so that's a debate for another day, I suppose. It also is going to depend on the room you're playing in and the loudspeakers and all sorts of things. But it goes without saying that, the lower the distortion, the better, right?
Mm-hmm. So a couple other things, Ben, that I've seen, and I really have no idea what these mean. I've had amplifiers, and there's one that's a dampening factor. I have no idea what that means. Is it something for like moisture?
Well, it's damping factor, not dampening factor.
Ah, okay.
But I think you're in the great majority of professional entertainers. Frankly, I don't think anyone should feel bad if they don't know, because I bet if that was the $1 million question on Jeopardy, our industry wouldn't fare very well.
Yeah, so it's damping factor. Okay, so now what is that? I mean, I've heard the phrase used in many different, but I have no idea.
Well, when a loudspeaker moves, it has a resonant frequency of its own, and we want the loudspeaker to move in the way that the signal drives it. And we talked about in another episode, how magnets work and how loudspeakers work and all that. Well, okay, so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to, change the polarity of the voice coil to move the speaker out or in in a rapid fashion, to create waves in the air, to create sound waves. And any uncontrolled movement is not what we are trying to do. So the damping factor is the amplifier's ability to control that loudspeaker's movement. Think of it like brakes. Even though the amplifier is making the cone of the woofer move, it also has to stop it from moving when it's not supposed to. So the damping factor is its ability to control that movement.
So for that to work properly, does there have to be some kind of a return signal from the speaker, or how does that work so it doesn't?
Well, no, not necessarily. But funny you mentioned that. Loudspeakers are reactive devices, which means that as it's consuming electricity, it's also generating it, by that voice coil moving inside the magnet. And so there is what we call a back EMF, coming back into the amp. And the amp does have to deal with that as well. That's a good point. And that's probably Amplifier 201. And I guess, you could say that's related to damping factor, I suppose. But again, it's the damping factor is how we measure the amplifier's ability to control that cone's movement.
Interesting.
We don't, all right. Let's leave it at that if we can.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And then another one that's another head scratcher for me is slew rate.
That's probably worse than damping factor for a lot of people. The slew rate is the ability of the it's the measurement of the maximum change of the output voltage. And the slew rate is going to determine what our input frequency is and what our amplitude can be before we reach a point of distortion. So basically, it's how fast can it change voltage and at what level before it becomes a real problem.
And it changes voltage as it's putting that signal out. The voltage change is what causes, of course, the cone to go in and out, correct?
Yeah, it's our amplitude. And I'm trying to think of a way to make this a meaningful explanation. I think I would say that virtually any quality amplifier today, that's probably not something we're really going to look at. Any of the big amplifier companies that's putting out an amplifier today, I probably wouldn't even look at their slew rate. There might be some audio purists who are watching this who are gasping.
If there's audio purists watching our show,
yeah, that's probably not happening either. But but that's what a slew rate is. It's the ability of the amplifier to change voltage, and we obviously have to be mindful of the ability to change voltage at frequency and how that's going to affect the output of our amplifier.
So Ben, the final thing now, and this one I know a little bit about, but there's different power ratings on amplifiers, and let's kind of talk about a couple of common power rating that we might see on professional amplifiers.
All right. Well, one is it's going to be relative to the load it's driving. For example, with an 8 ohm impedance, our power rating is going to be X, but at a 4 ohm reading, our power rating is going to be Y. And that's because we have half the impedance. We're going to have roughly twice the power. It doesn't work out to twice because of the efficiencies and that sort of thing. But anyway, let's say that our power rating at 8 ohms is 200 watts. Maybe at 4 ohms, it's 350 watts. Less impedance means more power. 2 ohms and that sort of thing, less impedance, more power. But one of the things we really want to pay careful attention to when we're looking at our power ratings is how they came up with that measurement. Noting the impedance and setting that aside, I see power ratings all the time for either 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, which is full bandwidth audio, and also 1 kilohertz. Well, that doesn't do us any good. I mean, it makes for a nice big number when you can say, well, at 1K, this amplifier does this. Well, that's nice, but I'm not going to make 1K, probably. I'm going to make music. I'm going to try to make something between 20 and 20.
So you're saying that rating would be basically just sending a signal, a sound at the 1 kilohertz frequency.
Right.
One frequency.
Right, exactly. 1 kilohertz, 1,000 hertz, 1,000 cycles a second, however you prefer, that you'll get a power rating. And that is an approved measurement, but it's important to note that doesn't translate to full bandwidth audio output. Most manufacturers will publish both. And that's why it's just important to know which one you're looking at. And they say, well, this one's a lot more. Well, this is 1K and this is 20 to 20. Well, then it's not apples to apples. You know, we got to understand what we're asking our amplifier to do and how much power we really have for what we really want to do, which is make music.
So, Ben, we've talked about a lot of parts. Now let's wrap it up with a little, what are some pointers or things to look for when we're looking to buy an amplifier?
Well, I think, we can take all the things that we talked about and kind of weigh those. First point, and I'll probably make the point again before I'm done, is there's no free lunch. Just simply put, your budget is important, obviously, but, don't believe for a second that a $100 amp is on par with a $1,000 amp. I don't care. I don't care who says what. Unless it's some miracle of engineering, and it's not. So it's not, okay? But it's important to have a budget in mind and to, buy appropriately for your budget as well. So I'm not putting down the cheaper amps. I'm just saying they're not the same. Yeah. The tolerances of the components, the quality of the build, all those things go into play. The quality of the engineering and that sort of thing. Some of the other really important factors is, output power, output channels, features, whether the amplifier has any signal processing on board. Again, the better quality amps are going to cost more. The better signal processing is going to cost more. It's just a fact of life. Weight, how much do you want to carry? And then, of course, whether or not it can drive a 2-ohm load, if that's important to you, and those sorts of things. So size, weight, cost, output power, and then we can look at some of those things like distortion and that sort of thing. Also be, again, I'm not trying to pick on the inexpensive amplifiers out there in the world, but be wary of specs that look too good to be true. Mm-hmm. Remember that the higher-end amplifier manufacturers have higher-end clients. They have to be very exact with their specifications. And I'm not saying that the less expensive amplifiers aren't exact, but I've seen some things out there that defy belief, I think is a good way to say it. Just weigh the factors. Understand that a Class D is going to be more efficient than a Class AB. A Class H is going to be more efficient than a Class AB. Switch mode power supply is going to be lighter than a toroidal power supply. But it isn't maybe going to have the recovery that a toroidal power supply does for lower frequencies. So weight, versus performance, you have to kind of weigh some of those things. I didn't bring it to my table, because it's racked, but one of my touring grade amplifiers will deliver 7,000 watts legitimately, but it costs about $6,000, wow. And it is just sort of one of those get what you pay for kind of things, and it's a Class H design with an SMPS power supply, weighs about 18 pounds. So, you put 4 of them in a rack, you're talking about something that only weighs 150 pounds and has 4 amps in it, Wow. This is really nice because it weighs 2 pounds. It goes into the back of the speaker. It becomes a negligible addition of weight into a powered speaker. And it does the job for thousands of DJs across the country every day.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say in summary is...
It depends.
It depends.
I was waiting for that. I thought we had it earlier. You were lined it up, and then it's like...
I just dangle it in front of you the whole show. Just, tease you.
And then he comes.
It depends.
There we go. Oh, good stuff. If you guys have any questions, any thoughts, any comments, you can pop out to our Facebook page. That's Tuesday Night with Ben Stowe. You can search for that on Facebook. Questions, comments, put them there. We can get you there. If you're on Twitter, you can do the hashtag NLFXBen. That'll go right to Ben, and he'll be able to answer questions or give you thoughts or share the answers of life right there. That'd be awesome.
42.
42. That's
42 is the meaning of life.
wait. That's the number for the lottery. Not so.
I hope so.
Thank you, Ben. Good stuff tonight. This is John Young with the Disc Jockey News and Disc Jockey News TV. Thanks for watching. Good night.